Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to our channel. Ladies and gentlemen, in the relentless flood of daily news, there are moments when certain pieces seem scattered, disconnected, fragments that don't quite make sense on their own. But when you begin to link them together, they reveal an entirely different picture. A picture that if we don't look closely, we might completely miss, even as the truth stares us in the face. And the story of Gaza that we're about to dive into is exactly one of those pictures. In recent days, revelations from The Guardian, The Washington Post, BBC, and other major media outlets have not only shocked the world, but also uncovered a much deeper layer to the Gaza conflict, a layer few could have imagined. Because behind the calls for peace, behind the tense negotiations, behind the well-meaning declarations on television, lies a different plan. A plan meticulously crafted, covertly masked, and executed with the cold precision characteristic of geopolitical strategies on a superpower scale. The most chilling part is this: all the talk about reconstruction, stability, and rebuilding Gaza is in reality not meant for the Palestinian people. Leaked documents reveal that Washington and Tel Aviv have redrawn Gaza's map under an entirely new model. Not as a self-governing territory, not as a community given the power to rebuild, but as a modern-day version of a 19th century colony, cloaked in the language of the 21st century: investment, development, cooperation. They're not talking about peace. They're talking about a luxurious green zone, scrubbed clean of Palestinians. They're not talking about self-determination. They're talking about a red zone where 2 million people are trapped in a maze of ruins. And when we lay these puzzle pieces side by side, we begin to see Gaza is not just a war. It's a project that the United States and Israel are quietly advancing at such a brutal pace that even the so-called ceasefire exists only on paper. So what exactly is this ceasefire? Why did it appear at that exact moment, last just long enough, and serve whose purpose? To answer those questions, we need to move on to the next part, where ceasefire is no longer about peace, but becomes a diplomatic shield for another plan that's slowly coming to light. When the Gaza ceasefire agreement was announced, many people breathed a sigh of relief. On television, the air was filled with words of goodwill, restraint, peace, humanitarian aid, hostage exchange. But if we look deeper into the reality, we'll see something far more disturbing. This wasn't a ceasefire. It was a moment of silence, deliberately manufactured to conceal another campaign. A campaign that was quiet, methodical, and executed with chilling precision. Satellite images analyzed by the BBC revealed this unsettling truth. In just the first month of the ceasefire, over 1,500 buildings vanished. Not due to clashes, not by accident, but through the systematic erasure of entire neighborhoods following a linear pattern, as if a blueprint were being implemented step by step. Experts have dubbed this a zombie ceasefire, a ceasefire in name only. Meanwhile, international aid was left stranded at the border. 83% of homes had been destroyed, yet rebuilding was not permitted. Infrastructure lay in ruins, but construction materials were blocked. Civilians were told to evacuate bombed areas, yet forbidden to leave Gaza. A land demolished, then sealed off, then abandoned in a state unfit for life. This isn't just the aftermath of war. This is strategy. Ironically, the ceasefire served as a kind of moral cloak. In the media, Washington emphasized de-escalation. But behind the scenes, it created the diplomatic cover Israel needed to carry out a large-scale demolition campaign without attracting overwhelming international pressure. This ceasefire wasn't designed to preserve peace. It was designed to preserve silence. So why destroy so much? Why level entire neighborhoods? Why keep Gaza in a state of permanent unrebuildability? The answer becomes clear when we examine the leaked documents. All that rubble is no accident. Gaza is being prepared for a rebirth, not as a free land, but under an entirely different model. A model rooted in history, now dressed in the sleek language of the 21st century: technology, finance, investment. And that brings us to the next chapter, where the truth comes into sharper focus. Gaza is being redrawn, redivided, and reimagined as a modern colony with 2 zones, called the Green Zone and the Red Zone, where the fate of an entire people is being decided by cold lines on a map. When the documents accessed by The Guardian came to light, the world finally began to understand that the rubble, the flattened neighborhoods, and the scarred roads of Gaza were not random consequences of war. They were the cleared ground, the construction site, for a meticulously pre-planned redevelopment project. People often think of colonies as something found only in history textbooks. But in Gaza, a new colonial model is being sketched, 21st century style, smoother, more sophisticated, and wrapped in the polished language of development, stability, and international investment. The plan begins with dividing Gaza into two zones. In the north, a coastal strip is marked green in the leaked documents, the Green Zone. This is where the US and Israel envision building a prosperous oasis right on the Mediterranean. It would be reconstructed using funds from Washington, Brussels, Tel Aviv, and Gulf nations. Skyscrapers would rise. Roads would be repaved. Beachfront hotels, luxury resorts, and special economic zones would replace the residential areas that were erased. But there's one crucial detail. This entire area is designed to exclude Palestinian residents. The Green Zone would be managed by an international force led by the US, known as the ICF. Not unlike the Green Zone in Baghdad circa 2003, a safe, comfortable, wealthy world protected by Western troops, completely sealed off from the land surrounding it. The rest of Gaza, the destroyed areas, the zones barred from reconstruction, the overcrowded places where people are clinging to every inch of land, is labeled the Red Zone. This is where 2 million Palestinians would be contained, administered, and controlled, exactly as described in the military language quoted by journalists. No right to rebuild, no room to expand, no chance to develop. It is an open-air prison where people are forced to survive in the most depleted, restricted conditions. Looking at that map, what emerges is a clear revival of a stratified colonial model. One clean, wealthy zone reserved for investors, and one decaying, cramped zone designated for people who are no longer seen as rightful inhabitants of their own homeland. And all of it is wrapped in the polished, diplomatic packaging of the 21st century. But the story doesn't end at the blueprints of red and green zones. That's just the skeleton. The more complex and far more insidious core lies in how the US and Israel plan to control the land, the resources, and even the labor of the Palestinian people. If the 19th century was the age of military colonialism, then Gaza today represents a new era, financial and technological colonialism, where land is commodified and people are turned into a pool of cheap labor on their own soil. To truly understand how that operates, we need to move on to the next part, where Gaza is being digitized, financialized, and transformed into a colony 4.0, with land funds, asset tokenization, and tech projects designed not to serve the people who live there, but to generate profit for corporations. If the Green Zone and Red Zone are the framework of a new kind of colony, then the financial and technological tools that the US and Israel are preparing to deploy in Gaza are the engine driving the entire machine. Because 21st century colonialism is no longer about taking land by force. It has evolved into controlling land through contracts, governing lives through data, and extracting economic value through technology. Among the leaked documents, one of the most striking proposals is the Gaza Land Trust. It sounds civilized, even progressive, but at its core, it's a sophisticated financial trap. Palestinians, those who have lost their homes, their land, their future, are being encouraged to contribute their remaining land into a shared trust. In return, they receive a digital token. Real land becomes digital assets. Ownership becomes a stake in a fund. And from that moment on, Gaza is no longer the homeland of its people. It officially enters the marketplace of global investors. This isn't military colonialism of the 19th century. This is financial colonialism, where land is traded like stock and the people become temporary guests on the very soil they once called home. But it doesn't stop there. The plan also includes the creation of an Elon Musk smart zone, an ambitious tech hub for electric vehicle factories, battery production, and high-tech manufacturing. These global industries would be planted right on the land Palestinians were just forced to abandon. And the main source of labor? None other than the residents pushed into the red zone, people with no other options, transformed into a cheap labor force. Even the Gaza marine gas field, worth tens of billions of dollars, is now targeted as a source of clean, available energy to power these smart zone factories. Palestinians are completely excluded from this economic equation. They do not own the resources, they do not share in the profits, and they have no voice. Looking at the full mechanism, it becomes clear. Gaza is being turned into a massive laboratory for a colony 4.0 model, financialized, digitized, and designed to extract human value through a tightly woven network of outside-controlled technology and economics. But one question still looms large. Why? Why would Washington and Tel Aviv invest so much time, money, and strategy into such a small strip of land like Gaza? What makes this place so central to a much broader global plan? To answer that, we must look beyond Gaza's borders, toward trade routes, maps of influence, and the transcontinental projects that are reshaping the 21st century. And all of those roads, whether by chance or by design, lead to one name, IMEC. To understand why Washington and Tel Aviv are placing such a high-stakes bet on a territory of just 365 square kilometers, we need to view the entire Middle East as a grand board of geopolitical chess. Gaza, though seemingly small, is, on the economic and power map of the 21st century, one of the narrow gateways that could shift the global balance. And at the heart of it all lies one name, IMEC, the Indian Middle East Europe corridor. This is the most ambitious strategic project the U.S. has pushed since launching its Indo-Pacific strategy. IMF is Washington's answer to China's Belt and Road Initiative, a transcontinental trade route connecting India, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel, and then reaching Europe. It deliberately avoids Iran, bypasses Turkey, and most crucially skirts around China. It's a route designed to minimize geopolitical risk while maximizing the benefits for the U.S. and its allies. But IMEC can only run smoothly if its Mediterranean endpoint, the region encompassing Israel, Haifa, and Ashdod, is completely stable. And Gaza is the choke point the U.S. must resolve. An armed Gaza with resistance and ongoing instability is a direct threat to this new trade corridor. A destroyed Gaza, tightly controlled, forcibly stabilized, on the other hand, creates the perfect environment IMEC requires: land to build on, sea access to open up, and a security buffer to safeguard the Israel-Europe economic axis. But it's not just about trade. IMEC represents Washington's broader ambition in its rivalry with China. The U.S. aims to turn Israel into the neural center of the Middle East for tech, AI, defense, and logistics. And to do that, they need more development space. Gaza becomes the natural extension of that vision. That's why, in the leaked documents, the future of Gaza is described not as a war-torn region, but as a production complex, data hub, industrial zone, and even a luxury Mediterranean tourist destination. From this, we see that Gaza is not just a contested piece of land. It's a critical tile in a much larger confrontation between two competing world models, one led by US-backed trade systems, the other driven by China's global infrastructure initiative. These two routes cannot peacefully coexist in the Middle East, and Gaza becomes the site where the US sends a message. Whoever controls the Middle East controls the trade corridor, and that party will reshape the order of the 21st century. But to turn Gaza into a cornerstone for IMEC, Washington and Tel Aviv need more than just a green zone, red zone model. They need a reconstruction plan large enough to entice investors, spark financial momentum, and conceal the true nature of this war. And that's where a staggering figure appears: $385 billion, alongside a term that sounds humanitarian but is in fact deeply ruthless: voluntary relocation. And that, dear viewers, is where this story takes its darkest turn yet. When we hear the word reconstruction, we often think of humanitarian programs, relief efforts, and rebuilding projects aimed at helping people rise after the devastation of war. But in Gaza, those two words, reconstruction, carry an entirely different meaning. It's not a miracle of healing. It's a massive business venture, designed not for the Palestinian people, but for corporations, investment funds, and political forces looking to profit from the rubble. According to documents obtained by the Washington Post, the proposed reconstruction plan for Gaza is valued at a staggering $385 billion over 10 years. An enormous figure, one that, at first glance, seems meant to revive a shattered land. But when we look closer at how the money is allocated, it becomes clear that the majority is directed toward beachfront resorts, commercial centers, digital payment systems, energy complexes, and real estate developments that have little or nothing to do with the needs of the Palestinian population. Even the projected profits are laid out in striking detail: $324 billion in asset value, $37 billion in tax revenue, and $24 billion in net earnings. No so-called humanitarian reconstruction plan has ever come with a profit sheet that reads like a Wall Street investment pitch. At the heart of this plan lies a concept that sounds gentle, but is anything but voluntary relocation. The U.S. proposes offering each Palestinian $5,000 to leave Gaza and resettle in Egypt, Jordan, Africa, or Latin America. At first glance, some might see this as financial support, but for families who've lost their homes, their property, their livelihoods, who are now trapped in unlivable conditions within the red zone, the word voluntary becomes a thinly veiled form of coercion. Because relocation with $5,000 isn't humanitarian aid, it's a population restructuring strategy, a way to remove Palestinians from the land they've inhabited for thousands of years, a mechanism to clear Gaza for beachfront tourism projects bearing names like Trump Riviera, for industrial zones backed by MBS, MBZ, and a slew of global financial districts. And when those projects rise, when the hotels and special zones fill Gaza's beaches, no one will see the Palestinian families who once fled through smoke and rubble. All of that will be hidden behind the glow of glass towers, coastal boulevards, and luxury resorts. A glow bright enough to make the world forget that behind it lies a campaign of forced displacement. When we step back and look at the entire plan, one heartbreaking truth becomes impossible to ignore. Gaza is not being rebuilt to live again. Gaza is being rebuilt to generate profit, and the Palestinian people, the rightful inhabitants of that land, are being written out of the very future of their own homeland. As we come to the end of this journey, the picture of Gaza that emerges is not just the sorrow of a small, battered land. It is a mirror reflecting the very nature of our times. An era where peace is redefined by strategic interests, where reconstruction becomes a tool of power, and where vulnerable nations are easily crushed beneath the massive grinding gears of global geopolitics. Gaza today is no longer just a conflict between Israel and Palestine. It has become the intersection of major economic projects, of ambitions to restructure global trade, of the battle for control over a geoeconomic corridor stretching from India to the Mediterranean. In the clash between the United States and China, Gaza stands as a key pawn on the board of a world order being redrawn, not because of its vast resources, but because of its unparalleled strategic location. To Washington, Gaza is the missing piece needed to make IMEC, the mega project meant to counter China's Belt and Road, fully operational. It is the gateway for America to cement a new power axis stretching from New Delhi to Tel Aviv to Athens to Rome, a corridor designed to safeguard Western interests in the 21st century. To Israel, this is a rare opportunity to expand its strategic space, take control of the Gaza marine gas reserves, suppress resistance forces, and build a security belt around the Mediterranean. A Gaza that is fragmented, isolated, and fully dependent aligns perfectly with that vision. But for the Palestinian people, everything falls into shadow. They lose their homes, their land, their autonomy, and even their right to shape the future of their own homeland. They're left stranded between two global powers reshaping the world, people who simply want to live in peace, but who have been thrust into the center of a struggle they never chose. And that is Gaza's greatest tragedy, a small strip of land bearing the crushing weight of global power struggles. Ladies and gentlemen, after all this analysis, I would love to hear your thoughts and reflections on this issue. Please leave a comment below so we can continue the conversation. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to stay with us for future deep dive geopolitical analyses.